In this chapter, we'll take a look at a very powerful component in the Telerik UI for ASP.NET Core library called Chart. This highly configurable and highly dynamic component makes data visualization a snap. But because it's so powerful, there are also many features and configuration options to consider. Telerik UI Chart uses modern web technologies to render high-quality data visualizations. All graphics are rendered on the client using scalable vector graphics, or SVG, with a fallback to Canvas. The data visualization library that comes with Telerik UI offers several types of charts, including Basic Chart, Sparkline, which is an inline element, and a stock chart, and a hierarchical data visualization component called Tree Map. The RPS application will use a basic chart. This should give you a good idea of how to configure and update any type of charting component available. We'll start off the chapter by looking at the anatomy of a chart, then we'll dive right in and add a chart to the RPS dashboard as per the new requirements for visualization. We'll configure the chart in its simplest form and then extend the configuration with more available options. The Telerik UI chart is highly configurable and highly customizable. While all the configuration options are available in the docs website, let's go through some of the major ones now and the ones we'll be using in our project. This is the current state of our application, the one we're working on now, and we're going to be placing our chart right here under the All Issues heading. And just like the active issues, the data that you see up here, we want our chart to respond to the months filters and the assignee filters. All this is already set up on the back end for you, so you don't need to worry about the repositories. We will need to hook some things up in the view model though, so we'll get back to that. Let's take a look at the completed application for reference. Here's the chart on the completed application dashboard page. And these are the parts that we're going to be using. The chart will have a title. This title is completely stylable. In fact, all the parts of the chart have full customization capabilities as far as the styling. We'll get into a little bit of that in this chapter. The chart also displays a legend, which is intelligently generated based on the series items that you provided. We'll talk about series in a second. So here in this case, I'm presenting open and closed items in red and green, and you can see these displayed in the chart as two different series. The legend can be positioned anywhere around the chart. We happen to position it down at the bottom, and that's a setting we have to set, so we'll do that later. And just like any other chart, this chart has axes available to us. We have a y-axis, we have an x-axis. In our case, we're going to use categories on the x-axis as dates. Now, our category axis or the x-axis can contain any type of data, but since our data is going to be date-based, dates are treated differently in Kendo UI charts. If the x-axis contains dates, then the chart automatically distributes the available dates from the minimum date to the maximum date in our data set, and it lays the dates out chronologically. We'll see an example of this in our application. Finally, let's talk about series. You can think of series as the arrays of the actual data that's being plotted on the chart. In the RPS tracker application, we have two sets of series that we're plotting, the open items and the closed items. And they're presented as red items here and the green items. We can color the series in different colors. This is also something we'll do here. You can mix and match different types of series on a single chart. For example, you can associate a column type of series to display, which will display as a column like we do here. There's also bullet series, line series, area series. Here on the documentation site under all components, we can scroll down a little bit here to area chart, a bar chart, a bubble chart. Let's take a look at the area charts here. And if you click on one of these types of charts, you'll see an example of usage. Now, this is an area chart, which means we are seeing three different series displayed here on this particular chart, and each one of these series is an area type of series. But you can actually mix and match different types of series displays into one single chart. Let's go back here and let's take a look at the bar chart. So here you'll see examples of how to implement this, and you'll see how to set up the series. Now this will show you a lot of examples in HTML helper format, but we're going to be using the tag helpers in this course for the charts. And here is an example of a tag helper right here. Now, unlike many other widgets in the Telerik UI family, which are styled with CSS, the way we style charts in the Telerik UI library is by providing attributes on the elements themselves. So for example, the visibility of a line to false. So many of the chart components are stylable using attributes in the HTML. Let's set up the chart for our RPS application in the next lesson. In this lesson, let's add a chart to our application. On the dashboard page of our current application, we want to add it right under the All Issues heading. So let's go to the dashboard page, open up dashboard.cshtml if you don't already have it open, and right about the middle of the page, you have this row right here with All Issues as a H3 tag here. So this is exactly where we're going to add our chart. We're going to use a tag helper, kendo chart, and make sure we provide a name here. Since this is the only chart I'm going to have, I'm just going to call this chart. All our other configuration is going to go inside here. So when I go and refresh the page, you can see that we already have a kendo chart. Nothing is there though yet, but it's already being rendered. Let's give our chart a title. And many of the components that we talked about in the anatomy lesson, many of these are configurable by using child elements of the kendo chart, including the title. A good way to discover the API is by going inside the element and by opening up a bracket and seeing what's available. So you can take a look at all the different things that are available that you can configure. We're going to be doing series. We're going to be configuring series defaults and the category axis. You can also see that chart dash is an option. If you select chart dash and then press Control space, you'll see the different elements that you can configure that start with chart dash. So chart dash area, chart dash legend. In our case, we want the chart dash title. So that's a really good way to discover the API is just by using it and just by working with it. When I go inside the chart title element, you can see the attributes that are available here. You can set the position, change the font, change the color, and the background. And this shows you that you can style things right in line here in your HTML. So I'm going to set the text to All Issues. This is going to be the title of our chart. And let's go take a look at that. So here's our chart. And now we have this All Issues title at the top. Now we already have All Issues here, but I'm going to leave that there as well, just so that we have an example of a chart title. The data for the chart is already being generated by the backend. All we need to do is just convert it to the right format. And we already have the data structures set up for this. So let's quickly do that right now. I'm going to head over to the code and open up the dashboard cshtml.cs file. This is the dashboard model. I'm going to stop the running server just so that we can edit the code here. And let's add some properties here that are going to be used just for the chart. So along the x-axis, we're going to have categories. I'm going to create a property called categories, and this is going to be an object array. Now, before I mentioned to you that this is going to be dates, and yes, categories are going to be dates, but if you're currently using the tag helper to render your chart, you actually need to convert that to an object array and then specify the type as dates. And I'll show you that in a minute. So we need the categories to be displayed along the bottom. In our onGet method, I'm going to set that up right down here at the bottom. So everything that's chart related is going to be below this line. First, we need to grab the filtered issues, and that's coming from the RPS dashboard repo. We're going to call get filtered issues, and we're going to pass in the filter that we've already created. So this filter has the selected date range and the user ID on it. And our dashboard repository is just going to return the data that we need to display in the chart. That's the filtered issues. Now categories is already on there, filtered issues.categories. And if you take a look at that, you'll see that this is actually returning a list of date time objects, which we need to convert to just objects. So I'm going to select from that. And for each date time in that list, I'm going to cast it to an object. And then I want to convert this to array. Don't get too confused by my syntax here. Just understand that we're going to be setting up the categories on the front end, and we're going to specify the type as date times there. We'll do that in the next lesson. Let's continue setting up the data that we need to display. So we have the categories. Now we need to get the data for our series. So we need open items and closed items by month. So for each of the months in the categories, we're going to have a list of open items and we're going to have a list of closed items. And that's what these lists are going to represent. So a list of integers, this is going to be the items open by month. So for each month, we're going to get a count of the number of items open. And I'm going to just copy this line right here. I'll make a copy of it. And I'm going to call this one items closed by month. So we're going to bind the series for the chart to these two pieces of data. Let's go down here and instantiate that. Items open by month. It's going to be a new list. And items closed by month is also going to be a new list. Now the data for these is also going to come back with our filtered issues. So let's get it out of there. Filtered issues has this month items property on it. We're just going to iterate through that. And populate items opened by month and items closed by month. I encourage you to take a look at the code for this so you're more familiar with it. I'm not actually going to go through it here, but it is available for you to take a look at. So basically what we're doing here is just returning the actual items, and in order to display this on the chart, we just need the counts. So that's why we're aggregating the counts here. Now that we have data ready, let's start displaying this in the chart. In this lesson, let's set up the categories that we're going to display in the chart. Categories are going to be date objects that are going to be displayed along the x-axis. And dates are treated specially in Kendo charts. Even if we don't provide every single data point for the dates, the Kendo chart is going to calculate the dates that it needs to plot on the x-axis based on the earliest date and the last date, and it's automatically going to fill in all the dates in between chronologically. And we can control whether we're displaying by weeks or months. Let's take a look at how we can do that now. Here we are on the dashboard. We already have all the data coming in here. And if you saw the previous lesson on the data, you'll remember that the categories is actually an array of objects. So keep that in mind when we set this up, because we'll need to specify them as dates. The way we define the category axis is by using the category axis element. So I'm going to add that element. And inside here, we're going to have a category axis item. The category axis item needs a set of categories. And these are going to be on the model. So model.categories. Let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll see a bunch of gibberish down here. Now, you can kind of tell that they're dates, but the Kendo chart doesn't know that they're dates, so it's just calling toString on the objects. To let the Kendo chart know that our categories are dates, we need to let the category axis item know, and we do that by using a special attribute called type. If I hover my mouse over type, you'll see what type it's expecting, and it's expecting kendo.mvc.ui.chart category axis type. So it's not just date time in here. If you put date time in here, this is not going to work. We need to give it an enum, which is chart category axis type, and then you have two to pick from. We're going to use date here. So if you specify this as date, all the objects that are in the categories array are going to be automatically interpreted as dates. So if I refresh this now, you will see that we have nice looking dates here. Now the Kendo chart automatically decided that it's going to plot these as months, but we can also change that. We can control that and set the display range as weeks, for example. We do that with the base-unit attribute. This is also an enum, and that's chart axis base unit. We can set it to days, fit. Fit will automatically calculate what fits, and we can set it to years, weeks, and so on. I'm going to set it to weeks so you can take a look at that. And now you can see that we have weeks listed. Although, because of our date range, this does not look so good. So I'm going to go back to months. Now, inside of the category axis item, you have other sub-elements that can control the look and feel of the axis. So for example, you can set labels, lines, plot bands, and so on. Take a look at the documentation for what all these mean. But we're going to take a look at major grid lines. So major dash, and I can press Control Space here to see what's available. Major ticks, major grid lines. These will control how the x-axis displays. I want to control major grid lines, and what I want to do is set visible to false here. Let's save this and take a look. Now pay attention to the grid lines here. The vertical lines on the chart is something I want to get rid of here. So I'm going to refresh the page, and now we only have horizontal lines on our chart. Now, we do want to plot some data here eventually, right? So let's get into that in the next lesson. Now that we have the categories plotted on the chart along the x-axis, let's actually get some data in here. And we do this by using the series element. Now, as I've mentioned before, you can have many series. We're going to have two here, but let's start with one. So I'm going to define the series element here inside the Kendo chart. And inside there, we need to define a series item. And we need to bind it to the data that's coming in from the model. So I'm going to provide the data attribute and point it to model.items open by month. Let's take a look at that. Once I refresh the page, you'll see that we already have some data in here, and these are the open items. If I start filtering here, you'll see that our filter is actually affecting the chart as well, so that's working. Now it's not looking exactly quite right. Don't worry, we'll fix that in a bit. For now, you can see that our item counts are actually being displayed here. Let's get the other data set in here as well. So I'm going to copy the series item here and paste it here, but this time I'm going to bind to items closed by month. And now let's take a look. Now we're plotting two different sets of data on the same chart. However, it's kind of hard to see now what is what, which ones are open, which ones are closed. So we can automatically have the chart generate a legend for us by providing the names to the series items. So for this first series item, I can go here and give it a name, and I can say open. And for the second series items, I'll call that closed. And just by providing the names to each of the series items, this will automatically generate a legend for us. Right over here on the right side, you see that if you hover over each one of these, it'll even highlight it for you in the chart. So now I can tell that open is orange and closed is green. We're actually going to color it differently a little bit later so that it matches our color scheme. Now I can also control how each series item is displayed. Right now it's being displayed as a column because that's the default. But I can set the type here, and I can set it to chart, and I can use this enum chart series type, and I can use a different type. For example, let's give it a line type for the open items. Let's take a look at that. So now you can see that the closed items are displayed as a column chart, and the open items is displayed as a line chart. Now, I actually want to use column for both of these, but I don't want to have to set the type or certain other attributes for each of the series items. And for that, we have something called series defaults. It's another element that we're going to look at next. If your chart has many different series, ours has 2, it's still enough for us to be able to abstract some of the settings away into something that's called series defaults. Let's say we want to specify the type of series to display, a line chart or a column chart, but we don't want to define that for every single series item. We can do that using series defaults. So let's create another element inside of our Kendo chart called series defaults. So one of the attributes for series defaults is type. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this right here, chart series type column. Actually, I'm going to cut it out of here and paste it into the series defaults type. And I can just delete this type. Now I can control all the series just by changing this type up here in the defaults. So for example, let's take a look at bar. So now we've converted our chart to a bar chart. I actually want to still use the column chart, so I'm going to set that back. One other thing we can set here is an inner element here of the series defaults, and that's called stack. It just has one attribute that's called enabled, and I'm going to set that to true. And this will allow us to stack one series on top of another in a column chart. And this is exactly what we want. Now our chart is not exactly looking like we want it to, at least not like the finished application. So let's make some styling adjustments, and we'll do that in the next lesson. Earlier in this chapter, I mentioned that the chart is slightly different than the rest of the widgets in the library because the styling is actually configured through code or through markup in our case. We've already seen a couple of examples of this, but let's take this a step further. So this is what the chart looks like in our completed application. You can see that the green and the red match the green and the red that we've had earlier here under active issues. Also, the bars are flat, which is a different kind of theme. They're slightly transparent. The legend is positioned along the bottom, and the spacing between each bar is pretty small. This is quite different than what we're seeing right now in our existing application. So let's make some final tweaks here and adjust the styling. Let's open up our code here, and we're going to start with the series defaults. The first thing we can do is change the gap. So each series item actually has a gap attribute, and we can change the gap here, but we're going to do this wholesale in series defaults. So I'm going to define the gap to be 0.06, which will bring those columns a little bit closer together. That's much better. Now we also want the colors to match. And in this case, because each series has its own color, we're going to define each series color under the series items. So for the open items, I'm going to set the color, and I'm going to use hex here, CC3458. And for the closed items, I'm going to use a different color. This is going to be the greenish color. That's going to be 35C473. And now our colors match. Now the bars here look a little bit three-dimensional, and they're also not see-through. So let's make some changes here. To make them a little bit more transparent, we can actually set the opacity on the series items. So I'm going to set the opacity attribute here to 0.7. I'm going to do the same thing for the other series item as well. Now, as far as the three-dimensional look, the chart actually can be themed separately from the rest of the library. And right now, it's actually using the default theme from the less collection of themes, which are the older themes. So if I specify this to be the SAS theme, it's going to be using the newer themes, and that's the flat look that we're going for. We can specify the theme that we want to use right on the Kendo chart element itself. So right up here, I'm going to specify the theme to be SAS. And let's take a look at that. All right, now you can see that each bar is a little bit transparent and they look flat without the 3D effect. And that's what we're going for. We'll talk more about themes a little bit later, and I'll show you some differences between them later in the course. Finally, I want to move this legend over here, and that's also positioned with a separate element. Let's go ahead down here under the category axis. I'm going to define another element called chart legend. And this will allow me to do all kinds of styling on the chart legend. You can see that we can set all these different attributes on the chart legend. The one I'm interested in is position. Position is actually going to take an enum, and that's chart legend position, and I want it to be on the bottom. Let's save that, and let's take a look. This should give our chart a little bit more space horizontally. And there we go. Now, if you're wondering, how did I find out all these different enums to use? You can go to the documentation for more information about each of the enums available, and that's all documented in the API reference. So here's the API reference for chart, and as you can see, the different enums and the different classes are all documented here, and there's quite a lot of things to configure. We've just scratched the surface, but I wanted to show you some examples of how you can use this chart. Now it's up to you to dig in deeper and learn more about the chart and be able to configure it the way you want it.